Lands its 11th commitment of the 2025 recruiting class, and it's a defensive back from South Florida.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You ready to break down some good recruiting news with the Noles? I hope so, because that's what's about to happen. Hi, my name is Brian Smith, and welcome to Locked On Seminoles. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. We truly appreciate you coming in and checking us out. Today's show is going to be about Max Redmon, the new commitment for the Noles, talking some DB recruiting and where Florida State's recruiting is headed. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Max Redmon, defensive back, could play safety or corner or nickel in my opinion, but he played safety this past year for Cardinal Newman. This is a kid that has great hands, anticipation, and he's a player that Florida State scouted personally at the FAU camp a while back, and they've been on him, in his own words, ever since, constantly checking in on him and going after. Patrick Surtain is obviously a very good defensive back coach, and he knows South Florida well. He's lived down there. He coached for the Dolphins. He was the head coach for American Heritage. This is a pretty easy thing to figure out. They know that area extremely well. They know the background for the kid on and off the field. They did their due diligence, and they put in the effort to get him. He just announced just after 7 o'clock on 24/7 Sports YouTube channel that he was going to be a Nole. Here are a few notes about him. Number one, ignore the ranking. He plays at Cardinal Newman, which is a pretty good program in Palm Beach County. And Ricky Knight, who signed with Florida State last year, ironically, same high school. This is a good program, excellent academic school. He will have an easy transition to Florida State, but they played good comp. I'm surprised he's not ranked a little higher. Illinois wanted him, who they just had a first-round pick a couple years ago at corner. They understand the position well, and I just think that he's a guy that's a little bit undervalued. 6 foot, 185 pounds, has pretty good speed. He's a multi-sport basketball player, football player, track, etc. You can find a niche for this kid. He could probably play receiver because his hands are so good, but I especially like the following. All his traits lead to a guy that, and you got to have one of these if you're going to be good in today's college football, can play nickel if you wanted him to, because he's tough enough. He will thump somebody in the open field. His film proves it, and he's a kid that also just plays the ball well as a center fielder. So with Surtain, I'm going to give them leeway anyhow, but I really like this kid and just think he's underrated. So congratulations to Max Redmon for picking the Noles. He is, again, the 11th commitment they have. We're going to talk some DB recruiting in general, but another quick note here about this. From last class and this class, off the top of your head, how many players do you think Florida State has signed at DB that you think are from South Florida? What do you think? Out of the last two classes combined, the current one, 25 and 24. Out of the 6, 4 are from South Florida. This is a good trend for the Seminoles. If you're going to recruit well and you're a school in the state of Florida, it always behooves you to get the kids from the areas that typically have the most success. South Florida is obviously that area. Defensive backs in particular, along with receivers, 40, 50 years. It's just been insane how incredibly good these players have been at this spot. That's the other reason I'm not as worried about Redmond's ranking as some other teams might have been or some other scouts. He's playing against real comp at 7-on-7, pickup games, high school games, anything that he does. It's competitive down there. That's going to translate very, very well for him. If you want to look at anything else, again, it's Surtain. They're not going to pick a kid and go after him like they did. They really recruited him hard unless they were confident. So here are the other kids that Florida State has committed from last class, and this one's the defensive back spot. Just as a number, kind of a look real quick, and I'll go into this a little bit more later. Redmond and Ricky Knight from Cardinal Newman. Greg Thomas, who they just recently got, the big corner out of American Heritage. Again, that's the same high school Surtain was at. Charles Wester and Kai Bates are the two that aren't from there, but Jamari Howard is from that area too. He played at Norvell last year, just outside of Miami, in Miami Gardens. 4 out of 6, and then the other 2 are elite players in Wester and Bates. I think Florida State's doing pretty good at defensive back over the last class, plus what's going on now. they can compete. They're 6 guys. Put up any 6 DBs you want from any school. Florida State can match it. That's a great sign for the future. It wasn't that way for a while. They've had to use the portal some, etc. But now they're to the point, does Florida State really need to use the portal after this year? Barring, a couple extra guys leaving. I think Thomas will probably leave early, and I get it. But even then, like Bates, Jabari Howard, Lester, they've got guys, Ricky Knight, they've got good players that have come in. I don't think they're going to need that. That's one of the few spots that I would say that. I mean, if an elite guy wants to come, so be it. But it's not like it's going to be at the top of Mike Norvell's board. That's a good sign. Florida State's getting in-state kids that they want, that they targeted, had a lot of offers. This is a really, really good sign for Florida State recruiting. If you think about it, I'm trying to remember which class it might have been, but early 90s, it was, I want to say the 90 or 91 class, had a couple extra guys that could have played multiple spots like this. All these kids that I mentioned, this was a Bobby Bowden theme. They can play multiple spots on both sides of the ball. Like Kai Bates could be a receiver for you. Max Redmon has good enough hands. He could probably play receiver. When you have guys, I know Charles Lester definitely can. When you have guys like that, I think it's really important because teams never really know what's going to happen injury-wise, transfers, etc. So the versatility is kind of a nice little added bonus. Coming up next, we're going to break down a little bit more with some of these kids and what it means, but from a national perspective and why the national rankings, I know it's still kind of early, where Florida State's at, what it means for the Noles right now and in the future. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. If you're looking for an opportunity to go to an event, whether it's a baseball game, an upcoming college football game with the Noles, or even a concert, maybe a symphony. Heck, to that point, I'm a Metallica fan, and they've played with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. Maybe you go to both. One of the great ways you can do that is Gametime. The app is very easy to download, and in a couple of clicks right from your phone, you can type in Metallica, you can type in symphony, you can type in anything you can imagine, music, sports, events like that. You're going to have an easy time to get there. Most importantly for me, 2 categories. Number 1, you click on a seat, you get a view from your seat to where the stage or the field of play will be. Second, all-in pricing. This is a pet peeve. Too many places have pricing that shows one thing, then you click on it, you get to the end, whole bunch of taxes and fees. I'm not a big fan. I'm sure you're not either. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEJE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. It's a little early to worry too much about national recruiting rankings per se, but it is an interesting topic nonetheless. Right now, Florida State is 10th. They haven't updated the rankings like on On3 and some of these networks. They probably will in the next couple hours, but they're about number 10, give or take, in the rankings, which company you want to go with. Is that a concern? Is it good, bad? What's the deal? 2 things on that. Number 1, Florida State is in a situation where they have 11 guys. Some of these other schools, and again, it depends on the network on how they do the system for the rankings, that's a detriment. There are schools like Notre Dame has over 20. Rutgers has over 20. Different schools have more. Rivals and some of the others go by a point system, so each recruit gets a point. You can't tell me Rutgers has got a better class than Florida State. It's just per capita, it's different. I'm not picking on Rutgers, but I understand what they're doing. The more subjective evaluation is on threes. I like how they do their system. I don't always agree with the rankings per se, but I like the idea because they have checks and balances. Some of it is points, but a lot of it is based on where the kid is from. Does that area produce? Literally, that's important to them, and I'm 100% with that. Taking kids from the Northeast, like Syracuse takes 7-8 kids from like Connecticut and Massachusetts. Are you getting the elite kids from there? There's a couple of guys every year, but some of those other guys, they've recruited more down south this year. Syracuse will be brought up a little higher. They've got some kids from Georgia and Florida and stuff. That matters. That's something On3 does. And Florida State obviously recruits predominantly in the state of Florida, Georgia. They should. It's in their backyard. That is the Florida State footprint for recruiting. They're going to be benefited for that by the On3 rankings. The other thing is position. This is my biggest pet peeve, probably even more than the point system for some of these companies. If you go out and sign numerous players, pick whatever spot you want, you get 4 or 5 guys in one spot that are really good, which is weird, but it does happen. Do you have roster balance doing that? Really? I understand you can look at it from a 2-class perspective, but still, if the prior class didn't have any, you got underclassmen for a while trying to make up, you don't have any seniors, there's nothing good about that. You need balanced classes every year. It's hard, but that's why very few teams are really good at recruiting. Florida State has done a pretty good job. They got 4 DBs last year. They got 2 already this year. Slow and steady. They're taking kids they want, and they've got balance. They've got multiple players just about everywhere in their class, and I think they're on the right path. If they stay the course like this, they'll end up with somewhere around 20 kids, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, because signing day will come and go with decisions you can't do anything about. Once they're done, that's it. But Florida State has always went after the kids, especially the South Florida guys that tend to wait to the very end. It's winner, go home, and you may not always win out on that. But with the way Norvell and his staff combines recruiting with the platform that is known as the transfer portal, very few programs can touch Florida State for their roster management. It's what they do best. You could argue it is the best overall in the country, and they're on the rise because of it. They're doing an even better job in recruiting than they have in the past. Obviously, last class was good. This one's trending in the very same direction with a bunch of guys still on the board. My only question now is, like, who's next? And we'll get into that. I got a few guesses because there's still the kids that can pop out of nowhere. That's something that definitely happens in the state of Florida. And there's also the possibility of some kids decommitting from other schools, coming back on the board, etc. This is recruiting in the new age. There's nobody that's a true commitment. So I know that things change. With that said, I think a lot of the kids that they still really want, some committed to other schools, are going to make very late decisions. That's going to impact Florida State's recruiting ranking right now. That doesn't matter. What does matter is Florida State finishing well. Again, that's the 4th of December for the date. Just for those of you who don't know, that would be National Signing Day. Florida State's class right now, though, again, is pretty balanced. I'm looking at their peers. Like, per capita, I like the class a little better than Miami's. It's definitely better than Florida's, who is flat out struggling. They're in on a ton of kids. They just can't get enough guys to commit. And I think that, to be honest, this is about where I thought Florida State would be. Maybe one more kid or something, but like, I wish they had a big time receiver to go along with Wiley. He's really good. The kid they got is tremendous, but the state of Florida's got so many receivers they might have had one more, but that's, splitting hairs. The only other thing I would say as a concern, where's the guy that they're going to get that's going to be a difference maker, maybe at linebacker, because that's obviously not been a happy spot in Florida State's recruiting, but there's still time to get a couple more guys. So we'll see how that goes. Coming up next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the classes and how that's kind of transitioning to looking at things long-term, because now the 26 class is as much in the crosshairs as 25. And more importantly, kind of looking at one guy in particular to kind of finish up defensive back recruiting and some of the things going on. Because Florida State, if they get this kid, it would be really hard to surpass, in my opinion, the best DB group over a 2-year period of Florida State just being really, really good. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. The top 10 teams in recruiting right now, just for the record: Ohio State, Bama, Georgia, Oregon, LSU, Notre Dame, Clemson, A&M, Oklahoma, Florida State. That's on 3. There's, for the most part, most of the commitments are done. There's a few teams that are going to change things around. It'll impact Florida State. It'll impact other schools. Fine and dandy. A few of the key commitments. DJ Pickett's going to make a decision pretty soon. Oregon or Miami's my guess, but DJ, even though I've known him since 8th grade, hard to say where he's going to go for sure. DJ is also a kid that could change his mind down the road, but for now, it looks like the 17th. Ironically, Javar Antoine out of Westgate High School in the greater Lafayette, Louisiana area is going to decide 3 days later. Why did I bring up Pickett? Because he's not looking at Florida State. Antoine's probably going to pick Florida State or Miami. I'm curious because Miami already has a couple of kids committed at corner. If they get DJ, would they go for a fourth corner? I mean, Javar's really good, but 4 is a lot. That's a lot. And how would that work? A lot of people think he's going to pick Miami. Maybe he does. I don't know him personally. I've met him in passing at an Under Armour event, but that's it. And that was last year. I'm not sure what to think of that. But if Pickett does pick Miami, that's going to be really interesting to see how they pitch the sell to Antoine. I heard he had a good visit there, but I heard he had a good visit to Florida State. It's not like Florida State is void of talent, don't get me wrong. But how many corners can you take in one class? It is Miami's biggest need. But these kind of battles are why teams go up and down in the rankings. And a lot of things can happen. One kid makes a decision, it impacts another. Another kid decommits, it changes what a staff does to go after kids. It's so incredibly difficult from day to day, to be honest, with what's going to happen with Florida State or any other school, because things outside of the coaching staff's control is huge. Again, Pickett is an elite player, no doubt, and wherever he goes, they will be very happy, but I have a hard time seeing Javar end up at Miami if Pickett is there. Now, I could be wrong because recruiting is wild, but that's something to think about. Also, with the players that Florida State has right now, just kind of looking at their class overall, and I was thinking about this with DB, the only kid they have, and why I think the class might be better than 10th, even though it's not a huge class yet, the only kid they have last year or this year in the DB class, just as an example, that I'm like, I think he needs to play one spot, the more I look at it, is Ricky Knight. He could play free safety or maybe nickel, but that's kind of like corner. But I think he's a corner. The other 5 kids can play either or. That adds value to your roster. And that's something that you have to look at from recruiting. And I think On3, again, probably does the best with that, looking at it from an overall perspective. How do you put the class together, and do you have safety measures, if you will, to make sure if a player gets hurt, transfers, or just doesn't work out, is there a viable option already in that class, if it needs to be, that transfers from one spot to another and fills that gap? Teams that don't recruit versatile kids like Florida State's right now, like Charles Lester, could play free safety, strong safety, corner, probably play some nickel. Like, he's a very unique player. And oh, by the way, he can play receiver. Those are the kinds of rare guys that make your class better, even though they didn't do anything different. It's just they showed up. They have those gifts, or they don't. I love the way Florida State's class is conducted. Final point on that, how many other schools can match it? This is an advantage of recruiting in the Sunshine State. I'm looking at some of the lists, and again, position flexibility, getting South Florida kids with DB is just part of it, but also like Florida State's after Byron Lewis, one of the best running backs in Florida this year, South Florida kid, another kid from American Heritage. They're in on a ton of guys like this that are very competitive from highly rated programs. They're going to be easier to get acclimated to college football and playing at a major program like the Florida State Seminoles. I like where this is trending. I wish it would go a little faster. I'm not going to disagree with anybody that says, why they only had 11 commitments. They're recruiting Florida kids. They don't tend to make a ton of fast decisions, but whatever. They also are in on some other Georgia, Alabama kids that could change. Wouldn't be surprised if Zion Grady still ended up in the class. Wouldn't be surprised if several other kids do too. I do know Florida State is working on kids committed elsewhere, whether it's Miami, etc., SEC's programs. So let's be patient. Final point here before I wrap up. This class has come together well enough, and they kind of know where they're at. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it impacts the 26 class. How so? You know where you're at. DB's in good shape, but this state, for the most part, Florida State can recruit in-state every year and get all their DBs. It's one of the few states you can do that. There's 4 or 5 that you probably can, and that's about it. Florida's definitely one of them. Part 2, they are in on a lot of kids early, just from my research with the class of 26, not only in-state, but they're mentioned a little more nationally. Obviously, they already got their quarterback from the state of California. Florida State is doing good. By getting out in front and having a good class already built at 25, that sets up Florida State for the long-term future. There's really no reason to believe that in, let's say, 4 years, Florida State is not still one of the top 10 programs in the country. They're back to a point where I think high school recruiting is going to be borderline top 10 at worst every single year, and they should at least 40 to 50% of the time be in the top 5 of recruiting if they go 20 plus recruits. And again, it depends on the service that you go with. But nonetheless, the DB class, getting Max Redmon today, all the versatility, getting South Florida kids. I think Florida State recruiting has done a really good job overall. The back office staff deserves credit. Norvell and his staff is obviously as well. But it's a well-balanced group with so much versatility. I just think Florida State football is in a much better place than it's given credit for. And I just kind of wanted to note that as I wrap up. Please like this video and subscribe, rate, and review. And whenever you can, comment on YouTube. Love to talk whatever you want to talk about with Florida State, ACC, college football, whatever you got in your mind. Let's hear about it. Everybody have a great night. Thank you very much.